Okay, so we got to look at now operations and functions of the cell as well as membrane transports. We're going to be looking at what we call the big three methods of cell transport, okay, and they are crucially important. We go over them and over them in this unit. They keep coming back up because even multicellular organisms will use these methods, okay, as well as we'll look at some minor cell transport methods as well. All right, so we need to understand this term, compartmentalization. Not all cells have it, but ours do, okay? And all eukaryotic organisms have cells with compartmentalization, okay? Eukaryotic organisms are plants, animals, fungi, okay? Protists, our amoeba, our paramecium that we looked at last week, are eukaryotic cells. When you look inside the cell, you can see definable structures, okay? There are compartments or organelles that do a certain job. Prokaryotic cells, like bacteria, do not have those divisions, so their cells are less complex, and as a result, you never see any multicellular bacteria or large bacteria. Prokaryotes generally stay very small because they don't have this. They can't become specialized because they don't have that. Right? Know the role of each organelle. So, if I give you a quiz, sometimes I'll ask, tell me what this structure is. Sometimes I'll ask, what is the function of structure 2? Okay, so you got to know both. Understand that cells are a complex system of interdependent processes. Interdependent means if one process breaks down, so was everything that's connected to it. Okay? The exact opposite of independent, right? Which means you can do whatever you want and nothing affects you. Right? Interdependent means you are crucially, vitally dependent on everything else. Okay? And understand how the cell carries out its functions. In other words, cell theory point number 2. Okay, cells carry out the basic functions of the organism. And number 5, understand how materials are transported across the cell membrane and within the cell. Right? Because the cell membrane, it's very selective. Okay, it's not something things get across easily. Okay? They have to undergo certain processes or have certain structures, or the cell membrane has physically got to change shape in order to envelop them and allow them in. Okay? It is a very selective barrier that not everything gets through. Okay, compartments or compartmentalization. Okay, cells are divided into compartments, okay, by membranes. That is, every organelle within the cell has its own membrane. If it didn't, there wouldn't be separate sections. They wouldn't be divided off. Okay, so every part of your cell has its own membrane. Thanks, Carson. Okay. So the nucleus, obviously it has its own membrane, okay, and it protects all the DNA and everything from everything else within the cell, right? And so we've got to be mindful of those kinds of things, okay? Now, here's the other thing. This compartmentalization is present only in eukaryotic cells, okay? We are eukaryotes. Our cells have these compartments, okay? Same as plants, same as protists, same as fungi. They all have eukaryotic cells. Okay? And when you have these compartments, cells can do a better job of each function. Okay? Cells carry out the basic functions of the organism, but within the cell are organelles that carry out specific basic functions. Okay? So essentially, this is like your home a little bit. We can use the analogy of your house. Okay? If your house is a eukaryotic cell, it has several different environments in it. Okay? It has the environment in which you live, which you keep at about 20 to 22 degrees Celsius. Okay? That's a comfortable temperature for us. But if I leave food out on the counter at 20 to 22 degrees Celsius, it doesn't last very long. So I have a separate environment within the 20 degrees Celsius environment that's colder, my refrigerator. Okay? It's got its own shell or membrane, and there are separate conditions in there that are conducive to doing the job of keeping my food from spoiling. Okay? I even have another one inside of that, the freezer, okay, which is long-term storage for my food. I actually turn it into a solid and make sure that nothing happens to it for weeks or months or however long. Okay? Everybody follow me there? If I'm a prokaryotic cell or my house is a prokaryotic cell, I have to find a happy medium for all three of those processes. Well, yeah, I'm not going to do any one of those jobs very well. I'm going to keep my house at like 10 degrees. So I'm going to be cold. My food's going to spoil anyway, and I won't be able to freeze anything. Okay? But it's a happy medium. My food will last longer than it would at 20 degrees, but it's not great, okay, because I'm not comfortable. So it's not as efficient, which is why prokaryotic organisms don't get very big. Okay? They don't get very complex, and they're never multicellular. Without those organelles, they can't become specialized. Okay? What I mean by that is, this is a generalized animal cell. Basically, no cells in the body look like this. Okay? Every cell has slight differences in its structure. If I was looking at a muscle cell, I'd see way more microfibers and microfilaments and microtubules, and I would see way more mitochondria, because a muscle cell has got to be able to contract, relax, be flexible, and it's going to use tons of energy. Right? So it's going to need lots of mitochondria. So it'll have more of those. It'll be specialized for that job. Okay? Making sense? Okay? Whereas if you don't have those organelles, you can never say, well, I need more of these. You don't have any of them to begin with. Right? So you never see a multicellular specialized prokaryote. All right. So comparison here. A bacterium is a prokaryotic organism. Okay? It has a cell wall, not like a plant, but kind of, okay, made of different stuff. And you can see, here's the DNA inside. Okay, this kind of snarl here, but there's basically no other structures, and it isn't contained within a nucleus, which is why bacteria can mutate so easily. Okay, how many people have had strep throat in their life? Okay, and what did you take to get rid of the strep throat? Antibiotics, probably penicillin, right? But if you have an allergy to penicillin, you probably took something else. The issue here is that there are a lot of bugs out there now. Sorry, I shouldn't say bugs. There's a lot of bacteria out there, okay, that are resistant to penicillin. Right? Because it doesn't take much to mutate something that's that simple to become resistant. In fact, if you go to university and take genetics, this was one of the first labs I did in university genetics. We took E. coli bacteria, so we probably went to Arby's to get them, okay? And I hate Arby's. And we put them on a petri dish, and we grew them, okay? The next week we come back in, and we exposed the bacteria to ultraviolet light for 30 seconds. And then we transferred them to a petri dish that had penicillin on it, and they grew. Okay? We transferred some to a petri dish that had penicillin that we didn't expose to UV light, and they all died. But the ones we exposed to UV light for 30 seconds, at least a few of them mutated enough that they became resistant to penicillin. It's that easy. Okay? When you're that simple, it doesn't take much to make a significant change to your DNA. Okay? Now, you can also see the virus there, very small. Okay? No cellular structures, right? No metabolism or anything like that. Okay? This is half a micrometer right here, right? The smallest thing we looked at the other day was probably like 80 micrometers. And it looked pretty tiny under the microscope. Okay? This is less than half a micrometer. You're not seeing these with our microscopes. In fact, if we look at bacteria, if we have a chance, maybe I'll give you a slide for that on Wednesday, but okay, they're also very, very small. Okay? It's very difficult to see them unless you're really good with the microscope. Right? By comparison, here's the animal cell. Like, we can't even get a 20th of it in the picture. Very, very big. Because if you're specialized and you've got all these special structures inside, you carry out the processes way more efficiently. So you get bigger. Okay? You do a better job of everything. Okay? I mean, it would be like, guys, if you had an identical twin, okay? Genetically identical to you. Okay? You grow up in a place where you have access to good food and water, and they grow up in a place where they don't have access to good food and water. Which one of you is going to grow up to probably be bigger? The person who had good food and water. I mean, it's a simple thing, right? Okay. Well, if I get everything I need and I do a good job of processing it, I'll get big. Okay. This thing here has to stay small because it can't process what it has. All right. So keep this word in mind here. Prokaryotes. Okay. Those are the ones that have no compartmentalization. All right. Parts of the cell and what they do. DNA. Start with that. It's the most important thing in the cell. Okay? Your DNA is the genetic code that tells your cell how to make stuff. Okay? Yes, if I had all of your DNA in a cloning machine, I could make a copy of you. Right? But essentially, most of your DNA is sets of instructions to build the things you need to survive Yes, it was initially made to make, or used to make you, but now it's used to maintain you, okay? To code for things like how to make proteins, how to metabolize things, okay, stuff like that, all kinds of processes, make hormones, all that kind of stuff is all part of your DNA, okay? And all of that is housed in the nucleus, okay, in a nice safe place, almost like a vault, okay, where nothing can get in to damage it. Right? Now, if we look at the cell, the nucleus, this is what the nucleus looks like under an electron microscope. Okay? This is 1 micrometer here, so the nucleus is maybe 8 or 9 micrometers across. Right? It's not overly big, but we can see it. It's one of the biggest things in the cell. Okay? And you can see that the surface of it is kind of rough. There's bumps and stuff on it. Well, those bumps are actually pores. They're actually holes. Okay? They can open and close, kind of like the iris of your eye can open and close. Right? The reason we have those, is that's what allows the DNA, the copied DNA, to get out. When the nucleolus, copies some of your DNA, it'll send them out through the holes in the nucleus wall, or nucleus membrane. Okay? It'll allow them out through those holes. Right? If you look at it under an even greater magnification, you can actually see there's interlaced fibers, okay, that make up the structure of that membrane. Okay? It's a very tight membrane. Nothing gets through there unless the cell wants it to. All right. You also notice that surrounding the nucleus, oftentimes when you look at the nucleus through the microscope, and keep this in mind on Wednesday, it looks like the nucleus has a beard. Okay, it often does. Okay, kind of like a goatee, kind of at the bottom. Okay, it kind of looks that way because there's always rough endoplasmic reticulum attached to the nucleus. Makes sense to have that because it's covered in ribosomes, which make protein, as long as they get instructions from the nucleus to do it. So it's a good idea to keep a whole bunch of them nearby, as well as the structure responsible for transporting them from place to place. Okay, so we make the proteins, and the rough ER can quickly transport them elsewhere. So it's usually something you can see and label if you know where to look for it. Okay, you can usually find rough ER next to or attached to the nucleus, makes it look like it's got a beard. Okay. All right. So this process, you only need to understand at kind of a basic level. This is the process of protein synthesis, how your cell makes proteins. So here's your DNA, the blue stuff up here at the top. Okay? In order to read the DNA, it has to be pulled apart. Right? Imagine DNA is like a zipper. Okay? If you unzip it, you can see the individual teeth. Okay? And it's the individual teeth, the sequence of those teeth, okay, that allow it to code for things. Right? There's 4 nucleotides that end up on DNA. Right? There's A and T and C and G. Right? And they always go together in pairs. So you only need one side of the DNA, because the other side is complementary. Okay? So what your nucleolus does is it finds the section of DNA that it needs and pulls it apart, and then makes a copy of one side. Doesn't need to copy both. Okay? Just makes a copy of one side, and that is this pink thing here. Okay? It's called RNA. It's a single-stranded copy of one side of your DNA. Okay? So we've got deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, and then this single-stranded stuff called ribonucleic acid, one strand. Goes out through one of the nuclear pores after it's made and goes to a ribosome. And the ribosome reads the code and puts together a protein. Right? So as it's reading the code, it's sending out stuff to get the raw materials. Okay? So the raw materials get put together in the right order, and you get the protein you need. Right? So what you basically need to understand is the nucleolus copies the DNA. The copy of the DNA goes to the ribosome. The ribosome uses it to make protein. If you know essentially that sequence, that's as good as you need to know protein synthesis for grade 10. Okay? All right. Is it possible that your DNA could have mistakes in it? Yes. Okay? Anybody diabetic? Okay. Know somebody with diabetes? I mean, we probably all know someone with diabetes, but okay. If you are born with diabetes, not the kind you get from having an unhealthy lifestyle, okay, that's type 2 diabetes. But if you have type 1 diabetes, your DNA does not code properly for insulin. Okay? So your body produces this stuff that it thinks is insulin, but it isn't. And your cells don't know what to do with it. It doesn't have the right effect on your body, and as a result, your cells cannot absorb glucose. So what ends up happening is glucose just builds up in your blood, and your cells starve. Okay? And that can cause you to go into seizures and things like that. Okay? Everyone follow me on that? Okay? So the mistake is in your DNA. Okay? And I say mistake. I mean, I don't mean it like it's a bad thing. It's just a genetic mutation. Okay? There's some part of your DNA that just doesn't have the right sequence. Okay? And as a result, you make this protein, you make this hormone, but it's not right. Okay? And as a result, it doesn't do its job correctly. Right? And there's all kinds of genetic disorders that are related to a mistake or a mutation in your DNA. Okay? If you're colorblind, okay? Mr. Van Erf, down the way here, guy is totally colorblind. Okay? Sees like no colors at all. Right? Because in his DNA, in the spot that codes for a certain protein that's supposed to be made for your eye, his body doesn't make that. It makes something else that doesn't work. So as a result, the little cones that are in your eyeball, okay, that detect different wavelengths of light do not detect those different wavelengths of light. Okay? So he cannot tell the difference between lots of different colors. Okay? This is why when you come up to a stoplight, red is always on the left or on the top. Green is always on the bottom or on the right. That way, if you're colorblind, you know which one is lit. Okay? It's always that way. Okay? You never put red on the right-hand side. Okay? It's always on the left-hand side or it's always on the top for people that are colorblind. Okay? Now, there's some instances how many people have taken their driver's test already? Okay? Did you have to look at the little pattern of dots and you could see the number within the dots when you took your driver's test? Okay? Okay? Yeah, well, and you go to the optometrist, they'll make you do it too. But what they do is they have different shades of a certain color, and inside this pattern of dots is some dots that are a slightly different color that say a number or a letter. If you're colorblind, all you see is dots. You don't see the difference in the tone, and thus they can diagnose you as being red-green colorblind or totally colorblind. Okay, we can tell sometimes Mr. Van Erf gets out of the house before his wife sees him because he'll come in wearing things that don't match. We give him a hard time about it. We one day played a trick on him. We were like, "Hey, look, we've all got the same color shirt on." You know, we were all wearing totally different colored shirts. It's like, what a fluke! It's all like we're all wearing purple today. And he was, "Oh yeah, that's great. How did we pick that?" He was wearing yellow. Okay? Well, I don't know what the rest. None of us were wearing the same color. Okay, but yeah, he's just totally colorblind. He can't see any colors. Okay, now you mostly see color blindness in males. It almost never happens in females because it's on the Y chromosome, which only males have. Okay? It's on the X chromosome. Females always have 2 copies of that. And so they rarely have 2 copies that are broken. Okay? Whereas for guys, we only get 1 X and then we get a Y. If there's a mistake on the X, we're stuck with it. That's the only one we have. Okay? So we're far more likely to be colorblind than women are. Okay. Oops. Okay. Inside the cell, if you had one organelle that accounts for more of the cell's volume than anything else, it would be the endoplasmic reticulum. I'm counting both smooth and rough in that. Okay? There's a lot of them in there. Probably more smooth than rough, but there's a lot of endoplasmic reticulum because it's so important. Okay? Within the membranes of the smooth ER, lipids are synthesized. Okay? What's another word for lipids? Fats. Okay? Fats are synthesized. Fats are essential because that's what membranes are made out of. Every cell in your body has membrane made of fat. Okay? We need to have fats in our body, in our diet, because that's what our cell membranes are made out of. Okay? That's crucial for maintaining the health of all of our tissue. Now, do we as North Americans eat more fat than we need? Yes. Unquestionably, the answer to that question is yes. Okay? But that doesn't mean that you should go on a diet that has no fat, because that would be incredibly unhealthy as well. Okay? People who go on all vegetarian diets or they're vegan or whatever still need to consume things that contain fats. They'll eat like nuts, okay, and things like that that have oils and fats in them because they still need those to maintain tissue. Okay, I know I had an athlete one time in track and field who was vegan. She didn't eat any any fish, anything like that, like just nothing that cast a shadow, basically. Okay, and she would have to, she was always carrying around, a bag of like almonds or things like that. But of course she couldn't at school. She can't have nuts at school, right? Okay? But at track meets and stuff like that, she always had like a bag of almonds or peanuts or something like that because she had to get those fats somehow. Okay? And you can't get them from eating like vegetables all the time. Okay? You can eat certain vegetables or fruit like avocado. Avocado's got lots of fats and oils and stuff in it that are good for you. Okay. All right, so lipids are synthesized and they are for building or repairing membranes. Okay. Also, complex carbohydrates get broken down in here. Okay, it's starches that we talked about. Okay, drugs and poisons are detoxified. Okay, all very important jobs. Okay, so the ER is a very important organ. Now, most of this stuff happens within the smooth ER. Okay, the rough ER mostly has to do with hormone production and transport of proteins. So, which cells in your body would have the most smooth ER? What organ in your body does a lot of this stuff? Liver. Yep. Okay. Your liver is your largest organ, okay, in your entire body by quite a ways. And it essentially makes most of the enzymes that are necessary for you to digest your food. Okay? But it also has lots and lots of blood vessels coming to it because its job is to clean the blood, okay? To detoxify all the stuff that ends up in the blood. That's why if you've ingested things that are toxic to you, you usually feel nauseous afterwards, okay? Because what your liver is doing is breaking down those toxic materials and releasing a lot of the byproducts into your intestines, okay? Because the breakdown of those things either goes to your kidneys or your intestines or both, okay? Which is why we say if you're not feeling well, you should drink lots of water. That way you can flush it out. It goes to your kidneys, you'll urinate a lot, and you'll get rid of a lot of the toxins. And you'll probably not feel well. So you'll have some sort of intestinal distress. You're either going to barf or you're going to go the other way. Okay? Sometimes you're so sick you don't know whether you need to sit on it or face it. Those are awful days, but okay, that's your liver doing its job. Okay, and yeah, it's just getting rid of a lot of the toxic stuff within your body. Okay, that's what a hangover is, guys. Okay, not that you guys have any idea what that is, because I know you don't. Okay, and I'm gonna live in that ivory tower world completely. Okay, but that's what it is. Okay, if you feel sick to your stomach, it's because your liver's getting rid of all the alcohol. Okay, it's breaking it down, and the products of that breakdown they're nasty. Okay, and they'll make you nauseous. They'll make you not feel well. You'll be dehydrated, so you'll have a headache. You need to drink lots of water to help flush out those toxins. Okay, that's your liver doing its job. That's your smooth ER in every cell in your body working overtime to get rid of all the poison you put in yourself. Okay, that's what their job is. Okay, in the rough ER, hormones get produced, okay, and obviously we got transport of proteins, okay, in the rough ER as well. Now, under an electron microscope, this is what your ER looks like. This stuff here is the rough ER, and it's quite a bit more organized. It's almost like in neat rows, and you can see the ribosomes, these little black dots all over it, whereas this stuff here is the smooth ER, which is just a tangled mess of tubes, okay? And there's no ribosomes on it. So by comparison, it looks smooth and kind of disorganized, okay? But you definitely get this organized layering look to the rough ER, whereas the smooth ER just kind of goes everywhere, okay? This is something you can see if you know what you're looking for through our light microscopes that we will use on Wednesday. Remember, this is the stuff that makes the nucleus look like it has a beard. Okay? Smooth ER, on the other hand, that's a lot harder to see because it doesn't have the ribosomes and it doesn't have a specific structure. You rarely see that. Okay? All right. Will you be able to see the ribosomes? Ribosomes are smaller than viruses. You will not see those. Okay? You might see the rough ER, but you're not going to see individual ribosomes, so don't bother trying to label them. Okay? You can't see them. Ribosomes were not discovered until the electron microscope was invented. Okay? You cannot see them with a light microscope. Yes, they're going to be stained. 3 of the 4. 3 of the 4 will have stains, but you are also going to take a swab of your cheek, and you're going to look at that. Those won't be stained, but you can still see a lot of structure. In fact, you'll see more in those cells probably than you see in the others, as long as you get the contrast right, which I'll show you on Wednesday. All right. Lipids that get produced in the smoothie are, they have to be moved, Carson, quickly. They have to be moved quickly to essentially holes in the membrane. Okay? Their job is to repair the membrane. So there's lots of smooth ER running everywhere, always attached to the membrane in order to make repairs quickly. Okay? Right? All those drugs and poisons and whatever else that you might have ingested, they get detoxified and they can be sent to the membrane quickly as well. Okay? That's why you see so much of that stuff everywhere. Well, some stuff your body can't detoxify, right? Or at least it can't detoxify it fast enough. Okay? Oh, yeah, too much of it, right? I mean, you can die from alcohol poisoning. Your body can only metabolize alcohol at a certain rate. Okay? If you drink it too quickly, you overwhelm your body, and your body's reaction to that is that your brain detects a change in the acidity of your blood. Okay? And when your blood becomes acidic for whatever reason, it knocks you out. Okay? Same thing. If you have a kid who's like throwing a temper tantrum and they hold their breath because they think that'll get them their way, just let them. They'll pass out. Okay? And they'll start breathing again when they pass out. Okay? Your brain, listening guys, your brain is smarter than you are. Okay? Luckily. Okay? And that's what happens if you've consumed too much alcohol too quickly. Okay? Is your brain goes, you know what, I'm starting to not like what's going on here. Can you please slow down? Can you please stop? Okay, stupid. Stop. Fine. And knocks you unconscious. Problem is, if you've ingested too much alcohol before that happens, your brain becomes so impaired that it doesn't have time to knock you out. And that's when you can get alcohol poisoning, because now your brain loses the ability to knock you unconscious. Okay? Then, okay? Now, sometimes it gets you knocked out, but it wasn't quite in time. And there was so much toxin in your body that you go unconscious, and then your digestive tract says, hey, let me help you out. Okay? You're unconscious, and you vomit. Okay? What happens if you're lying on your back? You inhale your vomit. You don't choke on it. Everyone says that, right? Oh, you choke on your vomit? Your vomit is acidic, because it's the contents of your stomach. It actually gets into your lungs and destroys your lung tissue. You hemorrhage inside of your lungs. How many of you had Mr. Humphrey for a teacher? This nearly killed his wife. This happened to her after she gave birth to their first child. She had internal bleeding and she passed out. And she passed out on the floor on her back, and she threw up while she was unconscious and inhaled the vomit, and it nearly killed her. Okay? It's actually, if you ever hear Mr. Humphrey tell the story, he tells it way better than I do. But it was a pretty scary time for him. Okay? All right. So next thing, Golgi apparatus. Okay? We said the main job. Mickey, I'm getting tired of you talking while I'm talking. Okay? The job of the Golgi apparatus is to get rid of wastes. Okay? Now we said there's a receiving side and a shipping side. So all the wastes come in on this side, they go through, they get processed, and they leave as a small bubble or vesicle that then goes to the membrane where it can be excreted from the cell. Okay? So this is what the Golgi looks like under an electron microscope. So this is the cis side. You can see everything coming in on this side is small and dark. But everything coming out of this side, big bubbles. Okay, so it all comes in, it all goes out this side in big bubbles that merge with the membrane. Okay, this is all the small toxic materials coming in on that side. Okay, this is a vesicle right here in the process of being made. Right, and so it comes out on that other side. All right, lysosomes. We're only going to find those where? Animal cells. Okay, you're not going to find those in plant cells, and that includes the Venus flytrap and the pitcher plant and the sundew. Okay, none of those have lysosomes. Okay, their cells simply don't have them. So what we've got here is a food particle. Okay, the food particle makes contact with the membrane. On the membrane are a whole bunch of little, they're like antennas, I guess. Okay, and when something touches them, they can recognize what it is. If it's a hormone, a certain chain of events occurs. If it's food, a different chain of events occurs. Okay, but essentially they're all taken into the cell if they're an acceptable item. They can't go through the membrane, so the membrane engulfs them. Okay, like this. Okay, it just folds in on itself until they're trapped. This is gross, but if you ever had to pick up after your dog, right? You put the plastic bag over your hand, you grab the poop, and then you turn it inside out. That's this process. Okay? We grab it, we turn it inside out, and now it's inside a little vesicle that goes where it needs to go inside the cell. Okay? The process is called phagocytosis. Okay? It's the engulfing of food and solid items. Okay? Now, that food vacuole merges with a peroxisome as it comes from the Golgi. Okay? Once they merge, it becomes a lysosome. This is actually not labeled right. That should be peroxisome there. Okay? When it merges with the food vacuole, now it's a lysosome and digestion can occur. Okay? The same thing happens with organelles that have stopped working. Right? Because organelles get old and they stop working, so the cell recycles them. Right? It'll send out a lysosome to digest any organelles that are not working. Okay? So it kind of cannibalizes and recycles its own parts. Now, other thing that lysosomes can do. Lysosomes are the kill switch for the cell. Okay? If your cells stop functioning properly, most of the time they can recognize if that's happening. And they'll take one for the team. They will rupture their lysosomes. And the lysosomes will digest the inside of the cell. Okay? They'll go, if something's not going right, the cell is doing something it shouldn't do. It usually recognizes that that's what's going on inside, and it will send a chemical message to all the lysosomes, and their membranes will essentially rupture and dissolve. And that means all the digestive enzymes get out in the cell, and those enzymes are designed to eat the stuff cells are made out of, because that's what your food is made out of. And it'll digest the cell and kill it. Okay? So most of the time, that process works. If it doesn't, then the cell will continue to malfunction, and that's usually what leads to things like cancer. Okay? If a cell is dividing out of control, that's what produces a tumor. Okay? That's essentially what cancer is. Okay? Cancer is a malfunctioning of your genetic material that leads to your cell dividing out of control. Right? Now you might think, so what's the big deal about that? It's just your own cells. Well, the problem is as the tumor gets bigger, it uses up more and more of the raw materials and energy that were supposed to be destined for whatever tissue it's part of. And that kills the healthy tissue around it. So if you start getting tumors on, say, your liver, okay, those tumors will begin to kill the healthy cells around them. And that's what cancer does, is it essentially destroys you using your own cells. Okay? Which is why it's so hard to get rid of. Okay? You either have to go in and surgically remove the tumor or tissue, or you have to get therapies like chemo or radiation that actively kill dividing cells. Okay? Chemotherapy kills rapidly dividing cells, which is why you lose your hair. Often people on chemotherapy get ulcers because the cells inside your stomach divide rapidly as well. They have to replace themselves all the time. So they'll often get ulcers. Their immune system gets very depleted because your immune system has cells that divide rapidly to fight off infections and things like that. So when you undergo chemo, that's some of the stuff. That's why some of those things happen. Okay? Radiation, well, radiation is just bad for cells. So they find where the tumor is and they just shoot it with radiation until it dies. Okay? Right. Now, you had a question? No? Okay. All right. So that's the lysosomes. They got the strong membranes, okay, that protect the rest of the cell from those digestive enzymes. Okay, so they are essentially the site of digestion. Okay, so they digest food. Okay. Okay, mitochondria. Both plants and animals have these, but they're where cellular respiration occurs, where the breakdown of glucose to release energy happens, and that produces heat. Lots of it. So they have a double membrane that acts kind of like an insulator to the rest of the cell. Because if they didn't have this, the heat from their reactions would overheat the cell and the parts of the cell would start to malfunction. Kind of like when you have a fever. Okay? When you have a fever, the rest of the parts of your body don't function properly, which is why you feel just sapped when you have a fever, okay? Because all of your chemical reactions and metabolic functions are designed to happen at 37 degrees. When you run a fever and your body temperature goes up 2 degrees, 3 degrees, okay, you're getting into really dangerous territory there, and some of the proteins and enzymes that make reactions in your body happen properly denature. They actually break down, and then they don't work, right? That's what can kill you if you run a high fever for too long, right? So we don't want that to happen. These have got a nice insulating layer around them that protects the cell from their heat under normal operating conditions, okay? If you start exercising, these crank up the volume, okay? You start getting warm, and that's why you sweat, okay? As you sweat, the sweat evaporates, and the energy used to evaporate the sweat takes away the heat. But when you run a fever, you don't what? You don't sweat, okay? That's how you know your fever's broken. If you start dripping with sweat all of a sudden, then you know that, okay, my body's working again, fever's going to go down now because I'm starting to sweat. Okay? Which is why to make someone feel good, you often put like a cold compress on their head when they have a fever. Okay? All right, so mitochondria essentially burns sugar for energy. If you're looking for kind of a quick explanation, what does the mitochondria do? Burn sugar for energy. You cannot sweat blood, no. You can have a malformation of the tear duct that can allow you to weep blood, but you cannot sweat blood. Okay? Now here's the weird thing about sweat. Sweat contains lots of salts, including urea. Yep. That's why yellow stains sometimes appear on white shirts. Your sweat contains urea, which is the same stuff that's in urine. Okay? That's why sweat stinks so bad. Okay? Contains lots of oils and salts, and yeah. So sweating is like peeing all over yourself, I guess. I don't know. No one's going to exercise ever again now. Okay, but Jesus did lots of things that you and I can't do. I've never heard of anybody sweating blood. I've never even heard of Jesus sweating blood, but I don't want to question Mrs. Gill. She knows way more about religion than I do. But okay, well, if capillaries burst, that's different. You're not really sweating it. It's just leaking out through your pores. Yeah. No. Okay. Next one. Chloroplasts. Okay. We're only going to find them where? Plant cells. Okay. Some protists as well, but okay. Their main job, carry out photosynthesis. Okay. That's their job. They got to carry out photosynthesis, make energy for the cell, for the plant cells. Okay. Yeah. So big job for those. These we will see. Okay. These are easily recognizable organelle within the plant cell. When we look at the leaf, okay, we're going to see the layers of the leaf under the microscopes on Wednesday, and you can see near the top of the leaf there'll be kind of dark greenish gray haze or dots, or even sometimes you can actually see like kind of circles inside the cells, always kind of near the membrane, near the outside, and those are chloroplasts. You'll be able to see them quite clearly. They're fairly large, actually. All right, it also has a double membrane, but again, that's because it's absorbing sunlight all the time, so it's absorbing a lot of energy, and it needs to insulate the rest of the cell. Membrane, however, is transparent. On this one, obviously, light's got to be able to get through it, otherwise photosynthesis doesn't work. Okay, other organelles. Okay, so we got a few on here. The cell membrane. Okay, these are two terms you will need to know and use. On a test, that's what I want to see as the function of the cell membrane. It controls exocytosis and endocytosis. Exo means to leave, endo means to enter. Cytosis means of the cell. Okay, anything that's cytosis is movement in or out of the cell. Okay, so endocytosis and exocytosis. Okay, don't write controls what gets in and out. Okay, that's not a technical enough description. Now, your cell membrane looks like this picture here. All right, so it's way more complex than any, cell diagram that we've ever seen. Okay, the cell membrane is made up first of fats. That's all these little kind of bluish white circles that are everywhere. It's a bilayer. It's called a lipid bilayer because it's 2 layers of fats. Okay, and that essentially seals it watertight unless the cell wants water to move back and forth. Okay, also embedded within that are other things like big globular proteins, like this big red thing here. Okay, smaller proteins, sugars, okay, amino acids, things like that, and all these kind of receptor things that kind of look like big squiggly noodles that kind of come out of the membrane. All of those are receptors for certain chemical signals that may be present in your body. Right? So instead of having one antenna like your car, and you can pick up every radio station with it, it's got one antenna for every signal. So it's covered in these things so that whenever a signal is received, it's got something that can signal to the cell, hey, I just got this message, let's do this. Okay, so when it's receiving, let's say, insulin, okay, insulin arrives at the cell membrane, it chemically changes how the membrane acts, okay, and allows it to absorb sugar freely, okay, and the sugar comes in. Right? If it receives, let's say adrenaline, okay, then it'll crank up the metabolism within the cell. Okay, those signals are rapidly transmitted into the cell, so their actions are affected quickly. Okay, I mean, if you have a fight or flight response, how long does it take your body to react to that? Within seconds. Yeah, within seconds, your body is into fight or flight mode. Okay, yeah. So there's all kinds of things in there. It's a far more complex thing than you may have thought before. Okay, it's not like a layer of Jello. It's like Jello with a whole bunch of stuff in it. Like if you've ever made Jello with fruit in it, that's more like what a cell membrane would look like. Every chunk of fruit would be another, thing in there. All right. Cell wall. That's the cell wall under an electron microscope, the green thing. Okay? Yes, that's what it actually looks like. It's colorized. They digitally colorized it, but okay. This is what the cell wall looks like. As you can see, it's hollow. Okay? It's not that solid barrier that our diagram makes it look like. Okay? That's why I said it's really more like a house that's been framed but not enclosed. It's there for structure, it's there for support, but it's not keeping things from getting in and out. Anything can get through there. Okay? It's just there to support the cell's shape. Okay? And it's made of a certain material. It's made of cellulose. Okay? So the cell wall keeps the shape and supports the cell. Okay? That's its job. Just in plants, yes. Now, there are other kinds of cell walls. Fungi have cell walls, but they're made of something called chitin, which is actually the same stuff that bugs are made out of. Okay, so if you ever stepped on a beetle, and it makes that cracking sound, that's chitin. It's hard, okay? It's a very supportive material, okay? But a plant is made of cellulose, different fibers. Okay, the water vacuole, okay, it's that big kind of balloon-looking deal in the middle of a plant cell. The more water it has in it, the more rigid the cell's shape is going to be. Okay, it uses turgor pressure, okay, to support the cell. Right? Those would be terms I would expect to see if you were giving me a function. Turgor is just water pressure, so internal water pressure. Because one word is better than many. Okay. Centrioles, okay, we talked about those. This is a much better diagram than what I drew. Okay, the centrioles migrate to the 2 ends of the cell like this, okay, and then they send out these cables that attach to your DNA and pull it to the right side during cell division. Okay, so that's their job. Okay, they aid with cell division, ensure all DNA arrives in the correct part. Okay, and then we talked about microfibers and microfilaments already. Okay, they just help the cell stay intact during changes of shape, which is why you don't see them as often in a plant cell, mostly in an animal cell. All right. Do you need to write out the full detailed explanation on a quiz? No. Okay, find a way, like this is a place where flashcards are useful. Okay, put the organelle on one side and put a quick definition on the other. Okay, if it's like 4 or 5 words, that's probably good. Right? Like I said, for chloroplast, makes food using photosynthesis. That would be good enough on a test. Okay, cell membrane controls endocytosis and exocytosis, things like that. And use the technical terms, okay, for stuff like that. If you write nucleus, brain of the cell, well, see you later. Okay. All right. Okay, transport. We're not going to get too far into transport before the bell goes, but we'll start with the most important one. Okay, diffusion is a natural process. The cell has no control over it, but it works really well over short distances to transport materials, and they'll usually get where they need to go. Diffusion is the natural tendency of something to move from an area where it's in large or high concentration to areas of low concentration. It's very much like if someone in the room farts. Yeah, okay? If you're right next to the person who farted, okay, it's bad because it's very concentrated there. But if you're on the other side of the room, by the time it gets to you, it's dissipated. Okay? And after a few minutes, it's kind of all dissipated and we don't even notice it anymore, okay? Because it's become so diffused, okay, that we don't even, it's so diluted that it's not even detectable anymore. But at first, especially if you were near ground zero, okay, then, you know, it was very concentrated and very intense. But everything naturally moves from high concentration to low concentration. Okay, that's diffusion. It's just a natural process that your cell cannot control but utilizes. Okay, it makes sense for it to use it because it's free. It doesn't require any energy to transport material by diffusion, and it will usually get things to places where there isn't very much of it because it's naturally moving from, Nick, high concentration, Nick, to low concentration. Okay. Where it's needed, it's going to be in low concentration. So it's kind of naturally going to get there, okay? As long as it doesn't have to go too far. Diffusion works fine over small distances, which is why cells are small, okay? Cells can't get big because if they get too big, they can't transport materials with diffusion, okay? We could not reliably, for us, we can't reliably transport materials by diffusion from our digestive tract to our brains too far. Okay? That's why we have a circulatory system. It gets into the blood and we can actively pump it there. Okay? But it takes energy then. No, I'm saying small distance would be, let's say, less than 200 micrometers. Okay? You start getting a cell bigger than that and it's starting to take a long time to move things from one side to the other. Now, rarely does anything have to go from this end of a cell to that end of a cell. But, you know, usually it's got to move kind of from a central area out. So we don't want to have to go more than about 200 micrometers. So rarely do you see a cell bigger than 300 micrometers because it's just not going to be efficient at that point. And we'll talk about that later on as well. Okay, so a couple of things. Diffusion is passive. Okay, it requires no energy, which makes it really handy. We don't want to use energy to transport stuff if we don't have to. Okay, but remember, it's only going to transport stuff down the concentration gradient, down from high to low. Okay? Anything that's passive goes down the gradient. Okay? If it's active, that's like moving stuff uphill. Okay? You need to use energy to do that. Stuff doesn't roll uphill on its own. Okay? So anything that's passive is just allowing things to occur kind of naturally. Okay, so the simple rule of diffusion is, in the absence of other forces, substances diffuse from high concentration to low concentration. Okay? In other words, down the gradient. So basically that whole thing there is pretty important. Okay, so that works within the cell. It's not going to work over large distances. So if you're a multicellular organism, you've either got to be small enough that diffusion can work, or you've got to have some other transport system that's going to allow it to, that's going to allow you to move stuff actively, like again, like our circulatory system. Okay, do all animals have a circulatory system like ours? Nope. Okay, not all of them. Okay, clams and things like that, they have what's called an open circulatory system. They have a heart, but no blood vessels. And all it does is pump fluid around the body, and called hemolymph. It's like blood, but not really. Okay, but if you're a clam, you also don't move all that much, so it's not all that important for you to have a really good circulatory system either. Okay, all right, questions on that stuff? Tomorrow we will talk about osmosis, active transport, and the other kind of transport methods, and we'll get started on the pre-lab for our cell anatomy. Don't forget that your labs are due tomorrow.